Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of HazMat 101 Consultant Spotlight. I'm your host, Bob Koscignano, with my great friend, Captain Mike Plosky. How are you, Michael?
Good. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me on today.
I am glad to see you. You've been very busy in your
We
neck of
have been.
Florida. And just before we get started, everybody take a little. Today's date is November 7th, 2022. And just a little something because we're going to talk about hurricane response to Ian as far as the hazmat component goes. But just here's a little something we're looking at in the next day or two. That's going to be coming our way. And unfortunately, Michael, it looks like you're going to get a little wet. Well, we are going to get a little wet, but it looks like you guys it's coming right at you, as they said in that great movie. Uh,
Guarantee.
so that's what we've got to deal with because hurricane season is supposed to be over with by now. Um, but it is what it is, right?
It
Um,
is what it is.
it is what it is. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is that um, everybody knows that there's FEMA teams that get deployed for disasters and such. And with the Hurricane Ian that happened here just a short month or so ago, uh, we had a lot of FEMA teams from across the country, federal teams, and we have local USAR teams here in Florida that also responded. But there's a unique component that was added to this one. It's called a HazMat Strike Force, and it's not something that's really part of FEMA. FEMA has a couple of hazmat people or hazmat component, if you will, but it's not to the response. It's more of identifying and so forth. But this strike team, which Mike's going to talk about in just a few minutes, this was kind of developed from a couple previous incidents. So, Mike, if you could, a little bit about yourself first, and then dive right into how that whole strike force concept came into play.
Yeah, Bob. So 30 years in the fire service. About 16 of those have been in the hazmat response. Started out ending my career as an engine company lieutenant, and then I was kind of put over to the special operations division about 5 years ago to manage and do things for the hazardous materials response in the county since we didn't pretty much have one. That's the short one. Married, long walks on the beach, holding hands are my hobbies with my two girls that are out there. Um, Unique, yeah. I mean, you hit it to start the intro right off the top. Is that federal resources such as USAR response teams come into an area and do that search and rescue component, which is very needed after natural disasters, whether earthquake or hurricanes. And one of the things that we did at state level was we recognized through the State Emergency Response Commission that there's a hazmat component that are inside of these natural disasters that need to be addressed. And we started planning about this in 2021 at the state level, going, what can we do to assist USAR, or in another sense, create a special task force that will go out and address the hazardous materials emergencies only that are in a disaster area. So we started putting the framework together of what's called really as a hazmat deployment uh, task force slash strike team based upon what the needs of the area are. And this first came about in Hurricane Michael that hit the Panhandle, destroyed that area up at Destin. We sent a team up there. It really wasn't labeled that hazmat response team, but that's what their mission was. And what they did was they went out and made contacts with the tier two businesses that they had on file post hurricane and make sure that the containers and the structures and the management personnel were still there, and being able to basically check on the property to see if there was any type of incidents happening. That was real successful. Another sideline item was to go out and look for abandoned hazardous materials that may be just found upon discovery. And down here, we have a ton of natural gas lines and a ton of LPG containers that seem to grow legs or float very well in water. So they end up randomly being all over the place during disasters. Plus the other stuff that blows out from businesses, containers, cryogenic containers, all those different type of hazmats that we always talked about, and just span and look for them in the debris piles and figure out where they are and figure out a way to mark them. And what we do is just mark them, and come back and report those to the state so they can be collected later on during the recovery process. So then Surfside happened. Surfside happened, I believe, in 2021. And while the USAR team was down there doing that, they recognized again the need for be on the lookout for hazardous materials components, trap pockets of air, structural fires, or post subsurface structural fires that were down there. They needed some gas monitoring, some air monitoring, not to mention the decontamination
Right.
and contaminants that were coming off that pile. So that was another like big moment in the state of Florida. It's like, man, we really need to make sure these hazmat responders are going out to these things and giving us their opinion of it. So legally, 2022, the plan was adopted by the State Emergency Response Commission, and it was deemed a hazmat deployment overview. And I think it's the first in the nation that really is at the forefront of hazmat responders going out post disaster. And from there, then we had this little incident called Hurricane Ian that strike, and that's where it really grew legs and started to get the momentum that were out there. So we started out the plan right after the hurricane. We like 48 days prior to landfall. The ESF 10, which is the hazmat portion, which is ran by the Florida Association of Hazmat Responders, started to reach out to different teams, which are 36 in the state of Florida, started to reach out to different teams and figuring out which ones were deployable as a strike force. And we had named what those strike force the assets of a strike force were going to be. It had to be a strike team leader, just like a USAR. It had to be a hazmat type team following the FEMA regulations, whether it's a type 1 or type 2.
Right.
And then we're going to assign an engine company with operations personnel on it if they're available, and then possibly a tender or a water tender to act as our own water supply, and then an ALS rescue to act as that tox medic component to put it all together, and whatever support vehicles and trailers that you needed in order to make that happen. So the right after landfall, literally 24 hours, the first of 3 teams rolled out, which were Broward County Sheriff's Department, which is part of the fire department, or the fire department's part of the Sheriff's Department, that is.
Right.
However that works.
Yeah.
And West Palm Beach, and then Marion County from the Ocala area immediately deployed down to the theater, the action area. So it was interesting. We were wheels up within 24 hours, and each one of those teams probably had somewhere in the neighborhood. Let me adjust my phone. Sorry about that.
Right.
Each one of those teams had probably about 10 to 12 personnel that accompanied the strike team, and they were titled a strike team because their only duties separated from what an engine strike team would be, or an ALS strike team or a USAR strike team. Their only duties were devoted to hazardous materials, which is strictly unique in the fire service by itself.
Oh yeah. I tell you what, just to jump in real quick, I know in 04 when we had those 4 hurricanes come through, we didn't have any of that. I mean, we literally, in Orlando area, we got clobbered pretty good. We were literally just, as we got dispatched of stuff, because we were an engine / hazmat, we were still going around looking for stuff on our own, but we weren't part of anything. We were literally taking gas lines, folding them in half, or shoving sticks in them and taping them down and moving on to the next call. We didn't. It would have been nice to have the strike team concept back then.
Yeah, you're right, because you've got the impact area where the fire departments and the districts are out there running calls. Their calls are going to go up 75% during post recovery phase, but you really expect the hazmat team to still respond when they're some of our primary missions are structural firefighting and medical calls, and we do hazmat on the side. So you're almost taking away that component, that special need area that's needed post recovery in order to get out there and look for these hazards. So the model worked. Everything started to come together just greatly, and it really did work through our entire deployment out to Ian that my team did about 14 days post landfall. What was one of the important concepts at the emergency operations level is they said they needed to continue to support hazmat operations, and they gave them almost a 45-day window that a hazmat team, strike force, task force, was going to be present, boots on the ground in the theater where we were working.
Nice. So 45 days was roughly the time frame. How many sets of teams rotated through during those 45 days?
Altogether, 5 teams rotated through the action area. The first, I would say, 2 weeks, there were 3 larger task force that were geographically spread throughout Lee County and Collier County in different areas to address different needs. For instance, Broward took care of the traditional smaller, larger hazmat responses that would come up, whereas West Palm Beach was assigned potentially to be the decon team for the USARs working in geographic areas, and then Marion would come in and provide the county of impact a hazmat response while their hazmat team possibly was resting or answering structural or medical calls
Right.
inside of that. So that three-tiered system really worked out well. So we got involved on day 15 or 16 that we were deployed out there. And we basically, once the assessment was made through EOC, there wasn't really a downscaling is the proper term. That all those action areas, the three geographic action areas I described you more, basically just immobilized. But they recognized that a certain geographic area, like Fort Myers Beach, still needed a continuous hazmat response. So we scaled back from a 10 or 12 man deployment back to a 6 or 7 or 8 man deployment, and we only took 2 vehicles down there for that time that we were operating. We operated about 9 days in theater, and we were always on the clock, 24-hour notice, 24 hours on call status all the time while we're in that area.
Nice. So, how many? Well, we'll go into some video in a second, but how many hazmat calls do you guys think you ran? Was there a final total?
It's still being calculated right now. I know perhaps Broward and West Palm, they hit a couple of good incidents on the way down there. One was, the propane leaks.
Right.
Underground towns are the scourge during these in the Florida environment. So I know that they had a couple of propane incidents that they had to basically respond to the leak, and a couple they flared off. I know that they responded to for instance, Broward went out to the marina, and by then there was 80 to 100 boats and basically everywhere in 1 square mile. So Broward went out there and deployed Fort Myers Marine hazmat boom system. So they probably roped off, 2 miles of just an impact area where the leaking boats were, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. So that was one of their task mission also. And also, smaller stuff that we run, typically in hazmat work, smell of odors in the area.
Sure.
I think they had a grease vat in one restaurant that unloaded into the parking lot. So they had like 30 or 40 gallons of cooking grease out there. So we're still collecting the data on those runs. But for my team's deployment, we ran 7 incidents. And it was interesting because the first couple of days, it really didn't start happening. And basically we were trying to look around and see, what was going on. I guess what I'm trying to explain is, like, we got in theater probably 3 days later before we had our first hazmat call. And then they just started coming like clockwork.
Right.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. And Sarasota, we're still waiting to hear from them. They were the team that followed us as that 5th team in,
Mm-hmm.
and they were there for a 2-week deployment. And again, I just touched briefly with the team commander over there. They said a lot of LPG leaks, a lot of unknown chemicals, a lot of I smell diesel at a marina.
Right. Lots of that, I'm sure.
Oh, and also note, a big thing about electric vehicles was pushed out during this deployment.
Yes, I was going to bring that up.
I know there's a lot of discussion about those inside of our community right now, but we were on the hunt for those electric vehicles that were abandoned or are post-storm damage. And yeah, I mean, and lithium batteries, from as little as a scooter to a Roomba. We were reminding people to go ahead and take those out of their house and segregate those, separate them from regular household waste. And, on each target that we found, we GIS marked them with a mapping software, and then we went back and created a map later on, so DEP can go exactly and get within 10 meters of where we marked. It may not be there today, but it was there. Such as let's just say an electric vehicle was in the garage. We were able to move them out in some cases and say, here's where it's at. Go find it and have the owner deal with it.
Yeah, I know that, and not going to get into the whole lithium-ion battery thing, but I know you guys have had a lot of lithium-ion battery fires, EV car fires. They're popping up left and right all over the place, and there's lots of tactics people talk about for those, but
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
but
not to go down that.
that salt water really did a number on
But
a lot of
what
those.
you don't realize is, not to go deep down this rabbit hole
Yeah.
because it's good discussion for later on. When you get those electric powered vehicles, that cell, that battery system gets embedded or flooded with salt water for some reason. Then basically when the recovery company comes out there and moves that vehicle just an eighth of an inch, it starts that drive tame, that battery comes alive, and you don't know what's going to happen at that point. I
Yeah.
mean, literally, the car comes alive again and trying to establish power to it. And those are where the fires are developing. And certainly we saw that. We saw a electric powered vehicle on the back of a tow truck.
I saw that.
We found it day 16 into deployment. We marked it. We knew exactly where it was at. The windows were steamy. We knew that it had been flooded at that point. And then 4 days later, we were called out to response of a vehicle fire on a flatbed. And it was the same vehicle that we marked it and identified.
4 days later.
4 days later. I mean,
Wow.
this car sat, you think about it, car sat there for 19 days, did nothing. But on day 19, it woke up and it caught fire.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, a lot of stuff we found.
Yeah. Let's yeah, we'll talk about some of that here in a minute. All right.
Yeah, so that's my team out there. We were our first assessment or first mission per se that we were assigned to was a drone mission, and that was a photo that we took through the drone. That's typically what we found on the back of businesses, anywhere from those cryogenic carbon dioxide containers to nitrogen. The strange thing about that is we found a lot that were still in the open position. So we just took a couple extra minutes to secure them at the valves, wrap them up, identify them, mark them, and move on as rapidly as we could.
Right.
Typical responses. This is an incident that we got. This
meth
one.
lab. I'm gonna go meth lab.
No. Chemicals in a house, and she knew. The only strange thing about this is these were basic household chemicals,
Right.
and she called 2 days ago prior to us responding out there, and basically she said she had a box of chemicals and they were off gassing, and yeah, no problem. We'll be en route. What we didn't figure. What we found out was our route time was going to be about an hour and 15 minutes to get to the scene. So basically, the hazmat officer on board basically walked her through, walking them out to her mailbox area, and just kind of segregating those out for later hazways.
Good move. You hand
Yeah,
it
I mean,
over the phone.
Yeah, that was we talked long and hard about it, and he said I could basically handle this over the phone if I got her on it. So it was a great move by him. We were also tasked with go without Florida Department of Environmental Protection. We went out to Sanibel for a day and basically looked at some hard targets such as water treatment plants and wastewater facilities for the container. They were looking for, was the container there? I was looking for, is the container leaking? Right. So we paired up and worked together on a couple assessments. Weird one, yeah. This one's unique in itself. This was our third incident. The Marine teams that were out scouring around Fort Myers Beach decided to bring back 2 5-gallon pails full of who knows what. And they actually made it back to a hazardous materials collection point that DEP was monitoring. So when he went to survey the buckets, threw his detectors into a little bit of panic mode. So he asked us to come over there and positively identify them. So, it doesn't have to happen in the action area. This one happened probably, I want to say 12 miles at our FEMA refueling site where the collection is for some of these materials showing back up. Basically, they reinstated a policy that they're not bringing it back there anymore, which is good.
Good policy.
Yeah, typical Marine. We're in a Marine environment in the state of Florida with marinas and boating as our number one tourist. So that's a random drum that we found. This one was not associated with any marina. This was in somebody's backyard. Another one, 6 drums of floor repolishers and acrylic that were randomly spread. All of them were full. As you noticed, with the floodwaters coming in, a lot of the labels were torn off of them. So we had to do a little bit of investigative work, which is common trade names that your research officer can go through, especially Googling and try to figure out what the hazardous material inside of it was. Again, we weren't really stressing ourselves because we would inspect them to make sure they were intact and not leaking, but we weren't writing them and and doing other mitigation techniques where then if they were just still intact, they're still in the original container, let them be. We just marked them with bright orange paint and just moved on as quickly as we could.
And my understanding, there was a few drums that floated up, and the team was a little surprised when they opened up one of them.
Yes,
there's. I want to be careful here because I'm sure there's still some investigation, but I have it on good authority that there was a missing body, a missing person. The body was found in one of the drums. Potential homicide, who knows? It's under investigation.
Yeah,
But from a hazmat team standpoint, that would not be what I expect from opening a drum.
well,
Maybe if I was up in New York, maybe. But
New Jersey, Jimmy Hoffa's body surfaces, Florida.
Forget about it.
Yeah. As much as it is official, I could tell you could be surprised the activity of other crimes that are discovered during our assessment process. We didn't. Another team did find it when they were called out to investigate a potential site. And you kind of hit the Wikipedia version of it. It was another thing. So. Good photo of us. LPG are common. Go back to the LPG underground storage facilities. They're clipping them off left and right with excavators, recovery teams that are lifting up debris piles. These things are commonly used for pool heaters to other parts of the structure. This guy got clipped. He was about a 500-gallon underground tank located in the front yard on the address side of a building where you wouldn't expect it. This surveyor clipped it off with a front skid steer and ripped the valve out of it. And we went in there and mitigated it real quick. In some instances, easy. Turn off a valve. We were trying to do this, I guess Bob, a 5 to 10 minute hazmat mitigation.
Right.
What we do, you mentioned it earlier about bending over gas pipelines and stuff like that. And so every one of these was about a 5 to 10 mitigation job. And then we just figured out what else could we do. One of these things that we're doing right now is trying to mark the tank and leave some type of information, because again, our traditional gas suppliers, our gas maintenance companies are not coming out to the island to mitigate these, while we're standby. They're not just lifting the tank out of the ground and stuff like that. So we had to make a decision right then and there, how we're going to communicate this, when it's found later on. We could stop leaks, seal the container. In some cases, we flared some. In some cases, we just attached a business card to them going, hey, we found your problem. If you have any questions, call my number and I'll tell you what happened. We found it that day. So
and I just to so everybody understands the point there. This is the pictures after the leak was already mitigated, and this is where you guys are just identifying in case anybody had any questions.
We were strictly trying to figure out how we could tell somebody else.
Right.
Working with the local command. And keep a note, we were outside our traditional box of command staff. I mean, we weren't working with battalions and engine lieutenants that we have experience with. These may be random engine companies, strike teams from around the state that have their own way of doing stuff. In some cases, that technician to operations level, we've got to define that when we're out there on the ground, because we're the teams. Not to get in that, but I mean, you're just not working with your traditional box of people that you're familiar with communicating this stuff. We deployed out in several areas. This was out to Mayaka. We're a big drone program with UAS and drone technology. So we were asked to go out there and make these surveys. Basically, the Mayaka area, like Northport, like some of Central Florida, was just vastly flooded. So you have these very rural locations where families are living on their homestead, and their access road is totally flooded out for probably 3 or 4 miles off a main highway. So we would fly the drone over there and check on them, per se. Hopefully the drone didn't get shot down during that process, but we would go there and just basically check on the house as much as we can. Oh, the great picture. That's Broward deploying the Fort Myers Marine boom on that marina down there, and their personnel getting out that marine booming system to contain all the contaminants.
Contained,
Traditional out of the box. Again, another, the question comes up, can HazMat do this? And we're like, yeah, sure, we can do anything. You just ask us, we're out. This was a need in the Mayaka area to deploy our mass decontents to provide citizens a place to shower. By that time, the Mayaka area had probably been without power and running water.
So not a hazmat incident, just basically a public service to the citizens.
A public service assist.
Fantastic.
And because somebody in EOC said, hey, HazMat's got these showers that they can decontaminate people, why don't we task them with providing a community service to
That's awesome.
assist citizens and throw up some showers? So we put up 4 shower systems. I had to change the nozzles inside. I had to change some of the layout of traditionally what our
Sure.
operational plan would be. But I just made individual shells out of visqueen, and basically we turned 110 into 6 showers.
That's
You know, for
awesome.
them to use. Always outreach to the community, always
Yep.
100%. That's looks like West Palm Beach on a typical LPG above ground tank. And particularly, for all the listeners that are out there, you got to understand Florida in our mobile home communities, that's all they power these things on is natural gas. So a typical community can probably have 250 units with equal amount of LPG cylinders outside powering this. That's our community partners of Bradenton. They were down there focusing on TRT work and the way to into Fort Myers. That boat sitting on a nice Yukon is typical of all the damage and stuff that we found. So, a lot of lessons learned by this, a lot of stuff. That's our staging area. That's our traditional 7-Elevens that run in the state of Florida. Notice the debris field.
That's
I
crazy.
wish I would have taken a picture of the outside, but the block wall remains. Hey, that's a car we found in the canal. I couldn't even tell you where it's at today, but they're going to be I wouldn't go boating in the Fort Myers Beach area for a while because of all the lower unit problems that are going to be hitting cars and debris in the water and dumpsters.
The before and afters are just crazy, like we see here.
Oh yeah, I mean that's our USAR footage of the marina across the way there. And going just a note on that, Bob. When we were out there GIS marking these things, we were getting to locations that we would come back and record the data onto spreadsheets at the end of the night. And one of my technicians says, "Hey, just so you're aware, Google Maps shows this target in the water 200 yards offshore." And we're like, "Oh,
Wow.
well, that's not what it said now. It had shifted the topography of the land so much on the north end of that island."
Wow.
Yeah, classic cars. Those are always favorites. But that's a '65 Vet that was
I
left
know my
behind.
dad's got a 65 Vet. That breaks my heart looking at that.
Yeah, and look at the oddity of how we saw a flood average anywhere on Fort Myers Beach from 3 foot to 24 feet in different
Wow.
locations. So you've got boats just are in odd places all the time. And then again, they pose their own special hazards because each one of those vessels, can hold up to 50 to 60 to 200 gallons of
fuel,
gas.
yeah.
Yeah, as long as they're in their containers and not leaking, we're okay with it. We had to leave them in place. Interesting one that they actually had to load our team up onto a barge to get to Sanibel due to the bridge being knocked out there. So that was our only transportation route to that island. So that's a career moment right there to see my response vehicle, my truck up on a barge being pushed across the intercoastal. So yeah, variety of different stuff. Debris was everywhere. Everybody's seen the photos post Ian of the debris. It really is 100% accurate. Be expecting to find stuff in the weirdest places that are out there. We found anything from those cryogenic carbon dioxide containers to nitrogen that would be like propelling a beer tap system in a bar.
Right.
To abandoned gas tanks to we stopped counting 20-pound LPGs at the beginning of it. We just ran into 60 of them a day. And then we were focusing mainly on the 200 pounders and above to locate and geotag those. We would take the little 20 pounders and we would just wrangle them up in one area and rope them off. Yeah, one spot so they can be found later. And then I could tell you, we went back to one pile and people were asking us, hey, where can we get propane and gasoline from? We went back to one pile, like, yeah, it's gone. There was a whole cage here from a distribution center, and the cage was empty when we went back the next day.
Yeah, this is a picture. 34 CW34 News that I came across. I thought was interesting. This is an e-bike facility where they had lots of lithium-ion battery issues, and they had to remove a lot of them. Due to the floodwaters.
Great
remove them outside.
That's Broward and our district that's in Manatee County, Cedar Hammock Fire Rescue, working that incident. And basically they were bringing them outside, and it's unique on this one, not to get into that EV subject again. It was unique that they brought them outside and they were putting them in 55-gallon drums, and then they got with Public Works to bring them a load full of sand. So they were basically dumping the sand into the 55-gallon drums just to contain them in one spot.
Yeah.
So that interesting call. Definitely interesting call.
Yeah, definitely. There's all kinds of things going on with that.
And one thing, yeah, there was downtime that was out there. This is a team from Broward just in standby. One of the things that was interesting, and it goes with every disaster scene, was not the incident itself, but the smell from the restaurants being, the food
Oh, the
and
rotting food and everything.
rotten food was out there. Your meters would go crazy when you got around a cooler full of rotting lobster tails and other stuff, shrimp. Yeah, typical example. Great photo. Fort Myers Beach fire safety, the fire department infrastructure got kind of wiped out. This is their middle station that's on the beach. You can look at the tide waters or the flood waters that actually move that ALS unit into the other engine.
It's just like now, what was it, Naples that had their station flooded? That was
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and yeah, that's us flaring off. We made a decision on one of those tanks. This is about a 385 gallon that had 80 gallons left in it of liquid. The contractor hit it 40 minutes before we got there, and there was a white vicious tail coming out of that. By the time we got there, it auto refrigerated with that vapor, and we still determined we had about 20 or 80 something gallons still left. So we, instead of setting up a big flaring operation, we used our smaller flare. Just a big flare would be lights, Mazda lights, because it would structure fire calls would come in. So we just wanted to control the size of it, but still be able to get rid of the products. Yeah, just crazy stuff,
that
absolutely crazy.
that
Um,
is that's yeah, speechless.
it's a good time. Lessons learned. There's still continuing involvement of this, and I go back to think about these natural disasters. It doesn't have to be a hurricane. It could be an earthquake. It could be a tornado strike. Across the country, there is a need for hazmat response, and there's a niche for hazmat assessments post disaster to get out there and look around to see what's in your community to take care of them. And I certainly think this is a changing tide, a changing way, new way of thinking in post disaster operations here in the United States.
Great. Well, Mike, that's a lot of information. We could sit and talk about this for hours,
Oh
obviously.
yeah,
Um,
easily to go on for six
but
hours.
if somebody had more questions for you, especially about the Strike Force, Hazmat Strike Force, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, easy. Just send me an email. I monitor. Send me an email to my department. That address is mblosky at smfr.com. That's M as in Mike, B as in Blosky, Loski. The at symbol SMFR, Sam Mary Frank Romeo.com. And I'll be glad to get your emails. I'll send you any documents. We've been working on these documents for a while. We've got a written plan, sort of like an SOP about what we're going to do during deployment. And again, I'll assist anybody that's got questions out there to make sure it works the right way.
Great. And if any of you are going to be at the Florida Hazmat Symposium in January, the third week, both of us will be there. So you can hit us up there and I don't know, maybe even buy us a drink. Before we before we head out, just a couple websites for you guys to check out. The Hazmat Guys Facebook and website. Bobby and Mike, good friends of ours. One's now retired, FDNY. The other's still there, paying the other one's pension. Great podcast. Anything hazmat, they've got a podcast on it. The Hazmat Guys Roundtable. Those two gentlemen I mentioned, Bobby and Mike, myself, and Jeff Seintek, retired captain from Phoenix, and some Facebook sites to get some good information. Hazmat Group, Hazmatter Group, and Common Sense Hazmat. With that being said, Mike, thank you again so much. Everybody stay safe. Absolutely, everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next time.